Hello and welcome to the Kubernetes podcast from Google. I'm your host, Kaslin Fields.
And I am Abdel Sigiwar.
This week we're diving into Kubernetes 1.33 with the release lead, Nina Polshakova. Stay tuned to get highlights on new features, deprecations, and removals. But first, let's get to the news.
Google Cloud Next took place April 9 to 11 in Las Vegas, Nevada. Google announced 229 new things ranging from agentic AI to tensor accelerators and AI infrastructure to the 10-year anniversary of GKE and the Inference Gateway. We left a link in the description if you want to read more.
At KubeCon EU 2025, Google announced the public preview of MCO, or Multi-Cluster Orchestrator, a new service for managing workloads across clusters. MCO acts as a recommendation engine that recommends which cluster should host which application based on capacity and availability constraints. We had an opportunity to discuss the new feature with the folks who work on MCO, and will publish the episode soon.
The CNCF announced adding 2 new certifications to its portfolio. The Golden Kubestronaut, which recognizes individuals who obtained all 13 certifications offered by the CNCF, in addition to the Linux Foundation Certified Linux Administrator. And the Cloud Native Platform Engineering Associate, which is an entry-level certification for platform professionals.
The Kubernetes community introduced the Kube Scheduler Simulator, a web UI tool that allows users to create Kubernetes resources and observe how the scheduler and its plugins make scheduling decisions. The tool is meant to help users understand the internals of the Kubernetes scheduler decisions and how constraints influence it.
At KubeCon EU in London, Mirantis announced they will be donating 2 Kubernetes projects to the CNCF. K0S, which is a lightweight Kubernetes distribution, and K0S Motron, which is a cluster management tool. Both projects joined the CNCF ecosystem at the sandbox stage.
And that's the news. Welcome to our Kubernetes 1.33 release episode. I am excited today to be speaking with the release lead, Nina Polshakova, who is a software engineer at Solo.io, where she's worked on Istio and API gateway projects. She's been part of the Kubernetes release team since 1.27 and is currently serving as the release lead for 1.33. Welcome, Nina.
Hey, yeah, thanks for having me.
Thank you very much for the bio. I feel like you went over a good amount of your history there, but is there anything else that you want to elaborate on, how you got to where you are now?
Yeah, I mean, I think when I first joined Solo, because there are like open source projects that Solo has that like you can kind of go on GitHub and see in the repo like what people have contributed to. It was definitely like one of the selling points. So I like before I joined Solo, I hadn't really done much open source, but it was like an opportunity to like work in, you know, the open source space, like contribute to code that other people could see, which is kind of scary. But
working in public.
Yeah. I remember my first issue was a community issue, actually. Somebody was asking to add support to our API gateway for the Istio integration to work with Istio revisions. And I remember like we'd like talked about it offline with my team, and it was my first time like responding to a GitHub issue, and I had to tell him that we couldn't support revisions, but we could expose this other field, and like hopefully that was okay. And I was like so worried that for some reason that like I get like a negative response online. But it really wasn't that scary. Like I think most open source communities are very welcoming and, encourage collaboration. So I've only had like positive experiences, like commenting on GitHub issues, even, as a member of the Kubernetes release team. Sometimes you have to be, tell people that your enhancement isn't going to make the cut. Like please file an exception. And even like people are always like very welcoming and like understanding. And I think it's, a good community to be a part of because like people are nice online. It's not really like social media. It's like a project you're all working together to build and make better.
Yeah. One of my favorite comments that I always love to pull out is from the book Working in Public by Nadia Eghbal, where she says that the thing that keeps most people from working in open source is not actually technical competency. It's the fear of committing a social faux pas. So people usually are pretty nice in these communities.
Yeah, that was definitely like my biggest like fear. I was like talking to my manager. I'm like, oh, like is like I sent him the message before that I was gonna send on the GitHub, and he's like, yeah, that sounds fine. Like just post it.
Yeah.
But once you get over that initial hurdle, I think it's actually like a very welcoming space, and you get to work on cool stuff. So.
Granted, there are exceptions, and if you want to be amused by them, Dims and Tim Hawken did a talk at KubeCon a couple of years ago where Kubernetes contributors, Kubernetes maintainers read mean tweets. Very good.
I think that's like, on GitHub, there's a professional level of like communication. Like, yes, you can like downvote someone's like comment, but it's not as mean as like Twitter per se.
This is true.
So,
they have
yeah,
some GitHub comments in there too that are just
it can be spicy, but I don't know. There's like a
little spicy,
a little spicy,
not super spicy. But anyway, let's bring it back to Kubernetes 1.33. So as the release lead, you are very familiar, of course, with what's going on with this release of Kubernetes. Doing 3 releases a year is a lot, so let's help folks keep up with what's going on. What have we got going on in 1.33?
Yeah, so I think this is a pretty exciting release because we have 64 enhancements going in, which is a pretty big jump from previous releases where, like, in 132, we had 44, which is a pretty good number too. But jumping
I thought that was impressive.
64 is definitely, like, a significantly, like, large release. And we have a lot of exciting features moving to stable in this release, like sidecars, which has been a very long-awaited one. So native sidecar support is now stable, and then the other one that people like mentioning is multiple service cider support. So a lot of cool stuff going into stable in this release. But we also have some fun, exciting features that are more, hot topic features like dynamic resource allocation has 6 new features in this release, all related to DRA. So it's I think a good mix of both like stability and new and exciting things coming on the horizon.
Let's dive into some of these. There are a bunch of blogs that come out around the release. So if you want to dive into details on these things, definitely check out the blogs. I've got a list here from the highlights blog that came out before the release. And there's one deprecation mentioned, which is the endpoints API, which was stable, is being replaced by the endpoint slices API, which I believe makes some improvements to the way that endpoints are actually used. Endpoints API was a bit overly simple, right?
Yeah, exactly. And one thing to call out is deprecated means like marked for removals. So like features will continue to function until they're actually removed. And in Kubernetes, that's at least 1 year. So anything that's marked like deprecated, it's still going to function. And the endpoints API specifically is getting deprecated in favor of endpoint slices to make sure it's possible to run clusters without the endpoints controller. So endpoint slices have effectively replaced endpoints since like 121. And even several like new service features dual stack and topology are implemented only for endpoint slices, not endpoints. So the direction of the community is also like moving in the direction of endpoint slices, not really developing as many new features on top of endpoints. Another like thing to call out is like kubeproxy doesn't even use endpoints anymore. The Kubernetes Gateway API conformance tests are also not using endpoint slices. So in general, like the community in Kubernetes is moving on to endpoint slices. And what this KEP means is it's mostly about just documentation and tests. It's not actually deleting or modifying the endpoints API. That's not a goal of the KEP. It's like actually explicitly listed as a non-goal. It will, improve the end-to-end tests and documentation to show that like Kubernetes, is moving towards a world where most users run Kubernetes with endpoints and endpoint slice mirroring controllers disabled, and more in line with what the direction the community is going towards.
Very cool. Thank you for that additional context and for explaining the deprecations removals bit. Always something good to bring up. And I also want to mention that in the highlights blog post, there's a really nice description at the top about what the term means, about the rules of how deprecations work for different levels of features. If it was an alpha feature versus a beta feature, the rules for how the deprecation works are apparently a little bit different. And I thought it was a really good explanation.
Yeah, definitely.
And so that's the one deprecation that was mentioned in the highlights. But there are 3 removals that I want to call out. 2 of them were in the blog post, then we added one more. So there's the removal of kube proxy version information in node status, removal of host network support for Windows pods, and the Git repo volume removal. So let's start off with the kube proxy one.
So this is a field for nodes, which is removed in 1.33. The field actually wasn't accurate because it's set by kubelet, which doesn't actually know what kube proxy version, or even if like kube proxy is running. So it's not a very useful field, and it's getting, it was marked as deprecated before, and now it's getting removed in 1.33.
Makes sense. I've heard people talk about before how that field is inconsistent anyway, so probably shouldn't be using it if you are. And the next one is host network support for Windows pods. This one was interesting. The implementation faced unexpected containerd behaviors, which plagued its usefulness, and apparently alternative solutions were available. So removing host network support for native Windows pods in Kubernetes.
Yeah, exactly. It aimed to achieve the feature parity with Linux and provide support there, but basically, I think the original implementation landed in alpha in like 1.26, but it like faced some challenges, and the project decided to, or the SIG Windows decided to withdraw support for it, and in 1.33 it's getting removed. I think one thing to call out, because there was a question in the SIG Windows Slack channel, this doesn't mean that it's not affecting the host process containers. So host process containers are a special type of Windows container that run directly on the host, and this kept does not remove that. It's just aimed at providing the host networking, and it again was never stable, just because of the issues it faced. The Windows SIG has decided to deprecate it or remove it.
Yeah, it sounds like it was always unstable, so it makes sense to remove it. And the last one we were going to talk about is the Git repo volume. This is something that's been deprecated apparently for 7 years, and there were security concerns. This involves entry driver code because it's about Git repos, so it makes sense to be removing it.
Yeah, it's. I think it's been marked as deprecated since 1.11, so like 7 years, like you said. It's been a long time coming, and since it's been marked deprecated, there have been security concerns, like you mentioned, because your Git repo volume, it can be exploited in some ways to get like remote code execution on as root, so not ideal. And in 1.33, the in-driver code support is getting removed.
Makes sense. And I mean, generally, entry things that are associated with a vendor or like third-party system outside of Kubernetes itself, we're generally moving in the direction of removing those things. So follows the trend.
Yep.
And so that's the deprecations and removals to be highlighted. Beyond that, feature improvements, new things that folks can look forward to in 1.33. We've got quite a few. I mean, you've got 64 enhancements, so there's certainly more than we'll point out, but we've got a few on our list to go over. So starting off, support for user namespaces within Linux pods. This was one I hadn't really heard about. Apparently it was alpha in 1.25, beta in 1.30, and 1.33 makes it enabled by default. So what does this one do?
Yes. So this has been years in the making. I think the KEP number is 127. So if you look at other KEP numbers, they're in like the 5,000 ranges. This is a very early KEP. So it's been open since like 2016.
Wow.
And implementing it, one of the reasons that it took a while for this KEP to mature is that it's required a lot of changes across different projects, not just Kubernetes. In the KEP details, it highlights that they've had to have changes in Kubernetes, containerd, cryo, runc, crun, and even the kernel to actually make it happen. And it's a very exciting security feature in Kubernetes because it allows developers to isolate user IDs inside containers from those on the host. So that is great if you want to reduce the attack surface if your container gets compromised. So this is specifically a big win for like multi-tenant Kubernetes systems where you have like shared clusters, different teams and different organizations deploying workloads. Because if one of your workloads gets compromised from one tenant, it doesn't affect potentially like the other tenants or the host system. So it really aligns nicely with like that principle of least privilege that is very important for security. And it's as you mentioned, like still in beta in 1.33, but it's now on by default. So you can try it out in 1.33 and see what you think.
Some of the Linux sysadmins out there might be excited about this one. Folks who have been looking into Kubernetes for multi-tenant use cases for a long time. I love that call out for the use case. Makes a lot of sense to be able to separate the user IDs on the system so that if you were to escape the container, you could maybe shut down those user IDs and it wouldn't affect the rest of the system more, I would imagine. I'm very curious about the details on that one now. Another feature improvement in 1.33 that I want to go over is in-place resource resize for vertical scaling of pods. This is something that I've been talking with folks a lot. In-place VPA, in-place vertical scaling, in-place resize. So the ability to change the resource allocations associated with your pod without restarting the pod is very exciting. And so this has been in alpha since 1.27, and it's beta in 1.33.
Yep. And it's another oldie, so it's been open, like, I think since 2019. So, very, very old feature that has been long awaited again. And it is going to beta in 1.33. Basically, it, like you mentioned, allows changes to the resource allocation. So before, when you had to change like CPU and memory requests, you had to restart the pod, but now you can do it, as the name implies, in place. So this is really great for stateful workloads like databases, ML training jobs, inference servers, because you can't really disrupt them while they're running, but you might need dynamic resource tuning based on usage. So basically anything that can't be scaled horizontally or disrupted mid-execution can now benefit from this feature. So,
which is huge with AI workloads, which are so resource hungry. This makes it a lot easier to run your systems efficiently while giving those AI workloads the resources that they need when they need them. I've talked to a lot of folks about vertical pod auto-scaling and how most folks don't really use it because it'll restart your pod if you have it in the mode where it'll do that. There's another mode where the vertical pod auto-scaling will just tell you how you should set your resource requests and limits so that you can do it yourself and manage the disruption that way. But being able to do it in place is going to unlock a lot of potential, I think, especially for those resource-hungry workloads. Maybe Java, too. I've heard some interesting rumblings about Java workloads in this. Moving on, another very AI-related area, dynamic resource allocation. So DRA, you said, has a bunch of new features actually in this release, right?
We have a section called DRA galore in our blog, just because there's so many. They're kind of a lot of them are relatively small dynamic resource allocation improvements. So I guess taking a step back, dynamic resource allocation is the new API in Kubernetes to set the requesting and sharing of resources between your pod. So for things like GPUs, TPUs, like FPGAs, you can adjust the requests for those resources. And third-party resource drivers are usually responsible for tracking and preparing those resources. But the allocation of the resources is handled by Kubernetes with structured parameters. So this was something that was added in 1.30. And in 1.33, there's a bunch of, like I mentioned, small improvements that kind of make user experience better. So there's the additional support for partition devices. There's DRA device taints, so very similar to node taints, but your cluster admin can now taint devices to limit their usage. DRA prioritized list, so that defines how a request can be satisfied in different ways. So as you can see, it's like a lot of improvements to like improve the user experience using DRA. And like, fill in some of the gaps that maybe weren't there in 130, but now, are things that people need using these features. So
we had an episode actually earlier this year from this podcast where we talked about working group device management, which is doing a lot of work on dynamic resource allocation. And it was very interesting to hear some of the history of it in that episode as well. With any big technical architectural adventure, there are going to be challenges. And so I know there were some debates about how to do various different things for the DRA. So seeing a bunch of those come to fruition in 1.33 is really exciting.
Yeah, and I know there's like a classic DRA implementation.
Yeah, that was something we talked about.
And it rolled back, and like now this is the new version. So yeah, DRA has had a long history in Kubernetes in different forms, but the new form now has more features for you to play around with. So that's exciting.
And something I always think about with stuff like that is when we talked with folks about the Gateway API, one thing we always like to mention is that it's kind of, the new version of how you manage ingress traffic in your Kubernetes clusters rather than the original ingress API that came out with Kubernetes, because the original ingress API was very theoretical. It was like, here's what we think people are going to need. But now, since we have a better idea and we have all of these use cases and users to learn from, we have a better idea of what people actually need. So we've created the Gateway API. And I feel like dynamic resource allocation is kind of in one of those spots where we had an implementation of it, but now the use cases are real. Very real and very prominent. So that's kind of driving this innovation of figuring out how to actually make it work better for what people need it for.
Yeah, I think it's always easier to design when you have like a specific real world use case in mind. Then you can actually meet users where they are, not like designing for a theoretical user, like, oh, it would be nice to configure this. Like, we should just make it configurable for whatever users need. You either like, limit the scope too much, or it's like too open-ended, so people don't know what like the best practices are. So I think it takes a couple iterations to get to like a place where it's like something that people will actually use and make sense for modern use cases.
And I hope that's something folks can get out of these release episodes that we do, is we get to see Kubernetes changing over time, and we've always got the release lead on, but also Abdul and I have done a bunch of these release interviews, so we kind of have the context of how these things have changed over time. And so I hope that we go over use cases that help make these things more attainable for folks, rather than just reading the release notes, which are great and contain all of the technical information, but it's kind of hard to put it into context without a little bit more pizzazz.
Yeah, and I think this release specifically builds up on the previous like couple of releases very well, because you see a lot of like the usual suspects reappear, sidecars like graduating to stable, dynamic resource allocation again like has been like 131 like really highlighted it, and now there's more features that build on top of it. So every release is kind of building on top of the other releases. It's not like a zero-sum game. Like it's really like the project is just having more and more things built on top of it in the ecosystem. It's not like one release owns like a specific feature.
Yeah, when you have 3 releases a year, It's not like the release cycle ever really stops. Folks are often working on features that don't make it into the release because they're not done in time, or various reasons of reviewing, or something's just not there, or something, and so they end up in the next release, so it's always rolling.
Yeah, exactly.
Coming back to the feature improvements in 1.33, there are a couple more we wanted to go over. One is ordered namespace deletion. I love it when I see the word ordered in any new feature in Kubernetes. That's something I hear from users a lot, is that they want more control over the order in which Kubernetes does things. So ordered namespace deletion in this case.
Yeah, so this one I honestly was kind of surprised didn't exist already in Kubernetes, but it's going to directly into beta in 1.33 and is actually getting cherry picked all the way back to 1.30. For a good reason. So ordered namespace deletion introduces deletion priority for your namespace. So currently the deletion order is semi-random, which can result in not great behavior. So like if you have, like a network policy deleted first before your pod, that's kind of a security gap, right? Because you want to make sure that the pod gets deleted first and cleaned up, and then all resources like based on the logic and security dependencies of that pod are cleaned up, after. So there's no gaps in time where you don't have a network policy in place, but the pod exists.
Yeah, you don't have access to it, but the pod is there running whatever was on it.
Exactly. It's not great. But yeah, this is again, it introduces order, so you have more control over how it gets deleted, and it's no longer whatever was in place. It's like there's actual thought put into like what the deletion order should be.
Yeah, very exciting to see. And the last one that I wanted to go over was enhancements for index job management. The couple things mentioned in the highlights were per index backoff limits for index jobs. And then I put this one in my notes as a quote: define conditions for marking an index job as successfully completed when not all indexes have succeeded. There's a lot of interesting cases with jobs, determining whether they're done or not, that I think become even more important in an AI-based world, and I've seen some interesting talks on that. So good to see some more features going into jobs to make them more robust.
Yeah, the job succession policy was another one that I was kind of surprised Kubernetes didn't really support. So like your PyTorch workloads only a specific leader index determines if the job actually succeeds or not. So the current behavior in Kubernetes is all index jobs have to succeed for the job to be marked as complete. That seems like a limitation because you might want like a specific index, like the leader, to be marked as like successful, right? Or like a specific count. And now you have that flexibility to either determine like the success count, like how many jobs or how many job indexes were successful to be considered a success, or which specific index must succeed in order to mark it as successful.
Excellent. So that's all the feature improvements I had on my list to go over. I'm looking forward to seeing more of those release feature blogs and the release blog itself to get more in depth with all of these. Are there any other deprecations, removals, or feature improvements that we didn't go over that you wanted to bring up?
I think sidecars are another one that
that is a good one.
Like just working on Istio is important in that space.
Oh,
so yeah. It's also personally like when I joined the release team, I think it either became alpha in 127 or in 129, but it was like my first time either being on the release team or like being the enhancements lead. I'm now forgetting which cycle it was, but
following that one through.
I kind of followed it all the way through. And it's also, related to my work. So it's like a nice parallel in like open source work and like, day job. The sidecars follow me around everywhere. But
that's what they're supposed to do.
Exactly. Now they follow me around correctly.
Yeah. Now they follow you around natively.
Exactly. So the sidecars, it's a common pattern in Kubernetes, often used by service meshes like I've been implying. So Istio and Linkerd have this sidecar mode where you get your sidecar container injected next to the application container, and that kind of enables the service mesh to like do all the observability, connectivity, and security functionality abstraction, because it abstracts it away from the main container, and the sidecar handles all of that. And although it's like a very common pattern, it's not native. It wasn't natively supported. So you couldn't really coordinate the sidecar with the main container natively in Kubernetes until now. And now your sidecar, is like if you turn on this restored policy field, they're guaranteed to start before and terminate after the main container. So that kind of reduces friction of sidecar adoption. and improves the reliability of like how the sidecar's life cycle actually works. So I'm pretty excited about that, just because like, I saw the enhancements like through my career on the release team, and I think it is very important for users who are using sidecars in the community.
And the reason it's so common and popular is that a sidecar is just a container that exists alongside the container running your application in a pod in Kubernetes. And since pods are the single unit that Kubernetes manages, that means that both of those containers share networking, they share storage, they share basically any resource that Kubernetes manages for them. And since it's shared, that means they both have access to those things, which means you can do really cool things that especially service meshes do, things like intercepting traffic and ensuring that it adheres to MTLS and all sorts of stuff you can do with sidecars, which makes them very dangerous as well as a security tool if you wanted to try and hack containers, which is why it's important to have robust support for the pattern to make sure that you're creating those sidecars in a way that makes sense and managing them throughout the life cycle of the pod. Wonderful. So we've gone over the features, removals, and deprecations in 1.33. Let's get to the fun part.
Yeah.
I don't know. A lot of the listeners might debate me that that's the fun part, but I always enjoy hearing about the release theme. What have we got for 1.33?
So the theme for 1.33 is Octarine. So if you're familiar with Terry Pratchett's Discworld series, in it, Octarine is the color of magic. So on a personal note, like I love Terry Pratchett's Discworld series. He's one of my favorite fantasy authors of all time. It's a very long series, so like similar to the release cycles in Kubernetes, there's a lot of different books in Discworld. But I think like this release specifically, like there's a couple of things that reminded me of Discworld and like Octarine as a theme. The first thing was like KubeCon EU was set in London, and Terry Pratchett is a British author. So, and I think a lot of the conversation around, KubeCon was, on the magic of AI, like AI observability, things like that. And like everyone keeps using the word magic alongside AI, but I think Kubernetes is also pretty magical. Like it enables a lot of the magic that we see, like running, workloads across different industries. Even nowadays we're running AI workloads. And in one of his theories about like this, teenage witch who it's called the Tiffany Aching series. The magic's not very like flashy like Harry Potter. It's it's just like day-to-day average magic. And one of his quotes is like, it's still magic even if you know how it's done. And I think that's like very applicable to Kubernetes, where like it might be like infrastructure, it's like just running things, but it is like, if you take a step back, pretty magical that this open source project exists. It's run in so many like different industries. There's so many contributors around the world contributing to it, and every like release it has more and more enhancements going into it. So I think like it's like a on a personal note, like it fits in with my favorite author, but it also I think is a reflection of the Kubernetes like community and Kubernetes magic that enables that community. So
I love that. I have been interested in the Discworld series for a long time. I've heard great things about it, and I've never read it, so maybe this is my sign.
Everyone keeps asking for recommendations on what book to start. And you can always start like at the very beginning, but I feel like Terry Pratchett, kind of like Kubernetes, has also had like I think his early works are a little more rough than like his later works. So if you want like a one-off book to try instead of like sitting down and like reading the whole series, I think Guards is a good one. The logo of 133 is actually based on that book. It has a tiny
so
little
cute. Excited for everyone to see it.
on the Ankh-Morport Wizard Tower. So that one's like very fun. Like you can read it as a standalone. Another good one is Going Postal. If you like more satire works, it's like a satirical view of the postal system in this magical world. So it's like, if magic ran the postal service, how would it work? So those are the two that I would highlight as good starting points if you want an introduction to Terry Pratchett.
I feel like the post office one also might have some very interesting parallels to Kubernetes. Networking is at the core of all that Kubernetes does. So
There, yeah, a lot of message passing. It involves these clock towers that send signals. So, yeah, it fits the theme.
Interesting. All right. I've got new books on my list from this one, fantasy books, which is a genre that I love. So we've talked about 1.33, we've talked about the release theme. Let's get back to you. You are the release lead for 1.33. You've been involved since 1.27. What was your path like becoming the release lead?
Yeah, so the Kubernetes release team has this shadowing program that's really great because you get introduced to different teams on the release team as a shadow, and then you can decide if you want to switch teams or become the sub team lead. So I actually I hadn't had much experience with Kubernetes other than doing bumps in our Git repos, and I remember being burnt by one deprecation where Kubernetes removed the cluster name from as the cluster name label, and I remember being like, why was this removed? I don't get it.
Of all the things that could have thrown you off. All right. Very good.
Very, very tiny. Yeah, so that kind of got me reading the release notes, and then I saw that there was this shadow program that you could apply to, and then I was like, I kind of want to see how the sausage is made, how do people determine what gets in a release, how do deprecations get into a release. So you fill out a Google form and you write, why you want to be a member of the release team. And I'm sure I mentioned how cluster names scarred me. And now I wanted to make sure no one was scarred ever again, something like that. But I was lucky enough to get chosen as a shadow on 127 for enhancements. And I really enjoyed the people I got to work with, actually. I attended KubeCon that year in Amsterdam. I met a lot of people that were part of the release team, and I kind of I think that community made me feel like I wanted to continue contributing. So I came back for another shadow experience on enhancements, and then eventually led it. And then, jumped around to the release notes team, was a release lead shadow, and then eventually became the release lead. But I was very lucky this cycle, I think, because I knew most of the people that were either my release lead shadows or the sub-team leads. So I feel like I had a trusting relationship with everyone who was working with me. So I felt comfortable enough to reach out to them if things weren't going so well, or if I was concerned about a hiccup on the release path. I knew that the people I had with me would be able to step in and help me handle it. So yeah, I think it started off as Kubernetes bumps are miserable. I want to see how this is made, and kind of turned into this is a great welcoming community, and I want to keep being a part of it.
I bet a lot of our listeners out there can relate to that. I love that you were burned and then got involved as a way to better understand that feeling and maybe address it for others. I'm sure a lot of folks listening out there have been burned by Kubernetes releases. Proposal, get involved.
Yes, exactly. I think we have a really good shadow program. So if you're interested in Kubernetes, if you use Kubernetes, definitely apply. And there's a lot of ways to get involved that don't involve writing big enhancement design docs. You can improve documentation. You can help out, as a release shadow on the comms team. So helping reviewing blogs that get written. There's a lot of ways to get involved and learn what's happening in a new release without actually, committing that much time to writing the code and the design docs that you might think are the main contributions. There's a lot of different ways you can help out.
Excellent. So make sure that you check out the release shadow application when that opens next time. We always try to post about it on social media. And there's the Kubernetes developers Google group, which is the primary method that contributors use to communicate with each other. I don't know that we post anything about it on kubernetes.io, but we do definitely on social media and on the Google group.
Yeah, the GitHub issues and the Google group will definitely have links. And then we also try to post it in the Kubernetes Slack. So in the SIG release Slack channel, usually we have a post to the Google forum where you can apply.
Yeah, so keep an eye on those things if you're interested in being part of the next release and trying to prevent that pain that you experienced for others. And so I want to wrap this up with a couple of last items. One is any advice for anyone who does take your advice and fill out that shadow form?
Yeah, I think that the biggest advice is like don't be afraid to ask questions and get involved. Like just because we're doing things a certain way doesn't mean we have to keep doing them that way. Like I think when I joined Enhancements, there was the first cycle where we moved away from the Google Sheets tracking doc to actually using a GitHub project board, and that like saved so many hours of work. It was great. And ideas like that come from shadows who join, take a look at the project and want to like automate processes or like make improvements and make other shadows' lives better. So it's not like this is the way that it always has to be. It's like an evolving process, and we're always open to improvements, and asking questions is a good thing. So that's how you learn.
It's always wonderful to have fresh eyes on a process, and doing this 3 times a year. We've got lots of opportunities for feedback. Just need folks who are willing to give it.
Yeah, and I think like another thing to call out is like this release cycle is we've consolidated the release notes team with the docs team into one team. So there are only like 4 teams in the release cycle. There's enhancements, CI signal that tracks the state of CI. Comms and docs, but there are other ways that you can get involved. If you're interested in a specific SIG, you can always join that SIG's meetings and comment on a KEP, shadow like other roles in the release process. There's like branch management. There's a lot of different ways to get involved. Like release team is a great way to start, and it's how I personally started, and I love the people I get to work with. But that doesn't have to be the way that you get involved in the community. If there's a specific like field in Kubernetes you're interested in, like just attend some meetings and like get to know people.
Or attend new contributor orientation, which we hold once a month on the 3rd Tuesday of the month. And we have a playlist of recordings. So if you're worried about where to start, worried about committing a social faux pas, as many of us are when we join open source projects, make sure you check out new contributor orientation. We'll give you the guide on how the whole community works and how to find a place that works for you. I love that call out. And to close things up, I always like to ask the question of the release lead. Upgrading can be very painful, as you know from personal experience. So why should listeners upgrade to 1.33?
Yeah, well, I think we highlighted a lot of really cool features and some that we didn't even get a chance to mention that you can read about in the blog. Like NF tables are here, instable, like, multi-service CIDR support is here. So if you read the blog and are excited about some features, like I think that's a good sign that, maybe it's time to look into upgrading. I do think like if I had read the blog and the release notes, I would have found the cluster name issue back when I was doing that. So
make sure you read those.
This is important. Yeah, use Ctrl F to try to find anything that might affect you. But it is like I think important to keep up with the latest features that we have, and we have a lot of exciting things this release. Like there's 64 enhancements, and they range from things that improve user experience, like the kuberc feature that we didn't really get a chance to talk about, but a really cool feature going into alpha. Things that are affecting stability, like improving stability, like a sidecar support that we talked about, and really new exciting things like the dynamic resource allocation. So this release kind of has it all. Check it out, read the blog, and hopefully it inspires you to upgrade.
And with that, thank you very much, Nina. I've really enjoyed learning about 1.33 from you.
Yeah, thanks for having us. Or me. Sorry.
I've had the whole release team on through you.
Yes.
Vicariously.
Avatar channeling.
That's the job of the release lead, right?
Yeah, you're the avatar of the next release.
And I feel like this fits into the fantasy theme as well. I'm sure there's some of that in Discworld, right?
I don't think there's any Avatar references, but yeah, I mean...
That's okay. It's in the genre.
It's in the genre.
But thank you very much.
Yeah, thanks for having me.